What you've seen just now is an Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip in Palestine. Now reportedly, tensions are high in the area of around Palestine and Israel, focusing on Jerusalem. Now when it comes to this Palestine-Israeli conflict, it's a long-standing one. In this video, I'll be discussing about what is Palestine-Israeli conflict, what is the background to it, what is the history of it, what is currently going on in the area right now, and what future holds for us. Let's understand through this video. So what's up guys, I'm Rishi, you're watching Rishi Explains. Before continuing with our discussion, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos like these. So what has now triggered the Palestine-Israel tensions? Which the tensions are so high that the potential conflict is resulting in bomb attacks, killing many innocent people. Even there are also Indians on the list. Some reports on the Hindu newspaper say so. Now, what is the trigger of the conflict? Now, when it comes to the triggering of this conflict, on Monday that is 10th May 2021, reportedly Israeli armed forces stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Haram-e-Sharif in Jerusalem, the holy town of Jerusalem. It is said that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest place of Islam after Makkah and Medina in Saudi Arabia. Now, this Israeli armed forces attack, it happened ahead of a march by Zionist nationalists commemorating Israel's capture of the eastern half of the city in 1967. My information is purely based on reports from the Hindu newspaper. Credits to them. Continued. More than 300 Palestinians were injured in the raid. In retaliation, Gaza fired dozens of rockets that killed 2 Israelis. Israel launched an airstrike on Gaza in response, killing 26 Palestinians, including militants and 9 children. This is very painful because in between of a conflict, innocent civilians are also dying. That being the reported incident, what led to an escalation? What is the reason for the current blast in tensions? Tensions have been building up since the start of the Ramzan in mid-April 2021, when Israeli police set up barricades at the Damascus gate outside the occupied Old City. This is where Old City is located in Israel, preventing Palestinians from gathering there. As clashes erupted, the police removed the barricades. The threatened eviction of dozens of Palestinian families in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah escalated the crisis further in the last week of Ramzan. The threatened eviction of some Palestinian families in East Jerusalem has also caused rising anger. Israeli armed forces stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque with rubber bullets, stun grenades and tear gas to evict Palestinians, who Israel said had camped with stones and Molotov cocktail. Israel claims that they have the Palestinians were armed with they camped with stones and Molotov cocktail. These are weapons. Gaza issued an ultimatum to Israeli troops to stand down from Al-Aqsa. By the evening, they launched rockets and Israel strike back, and this is going on still in the area right now. When it comes to this conflict, how did it start? What is the background to it? Let's understand now. It is a 100-year-old issue. Now when it comes to this conflict, it all starts with Great Britain. Britain took control of the area known as Palestine after the ruler of that part of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, was defeated in World War I. We are talking about something which happened in 1917. And as per the Balfour Declaration in 1917, there arose the need to create a separate state for Palestine. The land was inhabited by a Jewish minority and Arab majority. We're talking about the Central Asian land, as you can see. Now, then, tensions between the two people grew when the International Committee gave Britain the task of establishing a national home in Palestine for Jewish people. For Jews, it was their ancestral home, but Palestinian Arabs also claimed the land and opposed the move. That's what is being said. Now, in 1917, the declaration was made. Tensions started rising. Here, between the 1920s and the 1940s, it was a very volatile period that time. The number of Jews arriving there grew, with many fleeing from persecution in Europe and seeking a homeland after the Holocaust of World War II. We all know how the Jews were killed in high numbers during the Holocaust, which happened during the World War II period. Then, violence between Jews and Arabs and against British rule also grew at the same point of time. In 1947, the United Nations voted for Palestine to be split into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem becoming an international city. That plan was accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by the Arab side and never implemented. That being the case, let's understand how the borders came up to be. What is the chronological event? Let's travel back in time. Let's go to the same time period, 1917. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration was came up. As I just discussed with you just a while ago. The Balfour Declaration, British Foreign Secretary James Balfour approves the creation of a national homeland for Jews in Palestine. That started back in 1917 during the time of World War I. As time progressed, came World War II, 1947. During that time, United Nations Partition Plan was adopted. What did the United Nations say? The United Nations successfully passes a plan to separate the Western Palestine into two states, Palestine and Israel. Jewish leaders accepted the proposal while Palestinian Arab leaders rejected it, prompting riots. This is where everything started. In 1947, when the United Nations Partition Plan was announced in partnership with different countries, here in this case, the Arabs did not agree to the United Nations plan. And subsequently, what happened in 1948? Subsequently, in 1948, the Arab-Israeli war took place. What happened during this conflict? During the Arab-Israeli war, the Jewish community declares itself independent unilaterally. What it means? It means nothing but in 1948, Israel unilaterally on its own, it declared independence in the Palestine area. That means it sidelined the Arabs. What happened back then? War breaks between Israeli forces and from nearby Arab nations. That is where the bitter tension started triggering. Though it continued on and on and on until the United Nations Partition Plan, but the whole thing started from the 1948 onwards, from when Israel declared itself unilaterally independent in the Central Asian region of Israel and Palestine today. Continued. As time progressed, came February to July period in the year of 1949. What happened back then? Israel and the Arab states agreed to an armistice that results in Israel controlling 78% of the Palestine area, the area which we are talking about. The United Nations estimates that more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs become refugees during this period. So slowly what has happened is the Palestine controlled area in Israel slowly started diminishing and stripped into and scattered into random places, with Israel controlling about 78% of the current Palestine area. This happened in 1949. Again time progressed. We are fast forwarding our time. We are going to 1967, in which another conflict took place that is called the 6-Day War or the Yom Kippur War. In this war, what has happened is Israel annexed the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, also the Golan Heights of Syria. This is what has happened in the 6-Day War in 1967. You can take a look at this map where these two places are located, Sinai Peninsula of Egypt and Golan Heights of Syria. Continued. In 1982, the Sinai Peninsula, which Israel annexed back in 1967, it returned it to Egypt in 1982. And these two countries, Israel and Egypt, sign a pact, a peace treaty, which makes Egypt the first nation to recognize the sovereignty of Israel in the Palestine area. So, by virtue of chronology of these events, Egypt becomes the first country to recognize Israel as a nation. Continued. Then comes another time period, 1987 to 1993. What happened during these times? First Intifada. In this case, Palestinians began a mass uprising in Gaza. A civil disobedience movements and riots spread through the West Bank. This is where West Bank is located. Continued. In 1993 and 1995, during these times, the Oslo Accords were signed. In 1987-1993, the tensions became more tense. The conflict became more tense. Civil disobedience movements and riots started rising in the West Bank. Where then came, as I just told you, Oslo Accords. In Oslo Accords, Palestine and Israel signed the Declaration of Principles, in which both nations seek recognition as autonomous governing bodies. The Oslo Accords, which were signed in 1993, were an attempt to bring peace between the conflict of Israel and Palestine, where the land was, the West Bank in Israel was divided into 3 zones, which is completely controlled by Palestine, one which is jointly controlled by Israel and Palestine, and one which is controlled by Israel. That happened in 1993, 1995, the Oslo Accords. Then subsequently came 2000, in which happened the Camp David Summit. In the Camp David Summit, the Israeli army withdraws from Lebanon. The Camp David Summit aims to help the two sides finally agree on a settlement. The talks eventually fail and the violence leads to the second Intifada, 2000 to 2005. Another talks, it did not work, it didn't happen accordingly, the Camp David Summit failed. Then came the Roadmap for Peace, April 2003. The European Union, United Nations and the United States of America and Russia released a roadmap which outlines a clear timetable towards a Palestine state. This case, 2003, there came another plan to bring peace between these nations. This time, the United Nations is involved with European Union, United States and Russia. What did they do? They outlined a clear timetable towards a Palestine state, how it has to be formed and all that stuff. That happened in 2003. Then we skip the time to 2005. The Gaza expulsion plan. Israel's defense forces leave the Gaza Strip and 4 settlements in the northern West Bank as part of a unilateral disengagement plan. This happened in 2005. In 2011 September, Palestine submits a bid to the United Nations for statehood and membership. This being the chronology of events, take a look at these maps. How Palestinian land started diminishing in the due course of time from 1917 to present. So in the case of this bitter conflict, what are the main problems? I have just discussed the chronology of events, what is the current situation happening in Israel, and also how historically multiple factors are responsible so as to this conflict, the persistence of this conflict. Now when it comes to this one, what are the main problems? What is the highlight here? When it comes to this one, there are a number of issues on which Israel and Palestine they cannot agree upon. These include what should happen to Palestinian refugees in different areas of Israel, whether Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank where Palestinian majority is there. West Bank should stay or should it be removed? Whether the two sides should share Jerusalem. Mind you, Jerusalem is at the heart of the conflict of this Israel-Palestine conflict, and you can take a look. At the location of Jerusalem, where it is located at the center of the disputed areas. Then, and perhaps most tricky of the main problem, the most trickiest problem here is whether a Palestine state should be created alongside Israel, given the current situation. Those are the main problems. Another thing is peace talks. As I just told you, many accords have been signed. As I just told you, the Camp David Accord, the Roadmap to Peace, the Oslo Accords, many. These have been going on for 25 years, about 25 years, but so far nothing has solved the conflict. The conflict still persists, and the current situation is showing it how bitter it is, which is leading to the deaths of innocent civilians, by the way. So, what is the future? What is the way forward? Would this conflict be ever solved? What does the huge future hold for this region? Here, in short, the situation is not going to be sorted out anytime soon, because the problems as I just discussed, they are not easily solvable. We cannot solve these problems very easily. Both sides are not agreeing. Both sides, they are having their own reservations on the thing. The most recent peace deal, which Donald Trump had prepared by the United States when Donald Trump was President of the United States of America. The recent plan prepared by the United States when Mr. Trump was President, called the deal of the century by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has been dismissed by Palestinians as one-sided. This peace plan, which was hailed a lot during the time when it was proposed, which was a lot in the news, this plan was hailed by Israelis, and Palestinians rejected it because it is more because according to them it favored Israel more. if a peace deal comes up in the future, it has to be in such a way that both sides should agree upon all that stuff. But given the current situation, it's not working like that. There is no end in sight to this conflict. That being the case, until that happens, it will persist forever. So given the situation in the area, who is right? Is it Palestine or is it Israel? What are your opinions on the same? Don't forget to write your views in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe. You can follow me on social media. The links will be given down in the description. And this is me, Rishi, signing off from Rishi Explains. I'll see you guys in the next video.